I've known about the Klonoa games for a long time, and I've always been interested in them. Every time I heard someone talk about them, I heard great things, like how they were hidden gems with a ton of heart, unknown because of their lowish sales. I always wanted to try them out, but the first game was a bit pricey on the PS1, and I didn't even own a PS2. So when I was watching a Nintendo Direct and saw that both games would be getting a remaster collection, I considered picking it up, and I ended up doing so a week after launch. I'm so glad that I did because I really enjoyed playing through both games. They deserve so much more recognition, and I hope this collection ends up giving these games the attention that they deserve. I'm just going to talk about these games as a newcomer who beat both of them on the Switch version. I won't be able to comment on many changes from the originals since I haven't played them, so this is specifically a review of the remasters. With that said, let's talk about Klonoa, Daughter Phantomile, released for PlayStation in 1997. Klonoa is a very unique game. I've played a ton of platformers throughout my life, and this is definitely one of the most unique that I've ever touched. A lot of platformers are simply about getting to the end of an obstacle course while contending with enemies in some bottomless pits, while also hunting down collectibles for rewards or a high score. Of course, these are the bare bones rules of most basic platformers like 2D Mario, but the point I'm trying to make is that Klonoa stands out so much from basically every platformer I've played in my life. While you're still trying to reach the end of the level to progress, the unique mechanics and level design are what makes Klonoa stand out so much. For instance, instead of jumping on an enemy to defeat them, Klonoa uses his wing ring, powered by his friend Hupao, to inflate enemies in front of him, which he can use as a double jump or as an attack, shooting it forward to attack other enemies, hit switches, or interact with objects. This is a 2.5D platformer, a kind of game that I've never actually touched before, and I've really enjoyed the approach to level design here. Essentially, 2.5D platformers have you going left to right like in 2D, but you can interact with background objects and the level will weave around different angles like in a 3D platformer. I really like this style, especially in the cave levels where paths weave around in shapes like a whirlwind, or when you need to throw enemies in the background to hit a switch to activate a door or something. The wing ring is the main mechanic that the game is built around. A lot of platforms can only be reached by a double jump, so you're required to learn how to use it effectively. Granted, it's simple to pick up enemies. Walk up to one, push a single button to use your wing ring, and then they're no longer a threat, which is what the first few levels tell you to take care of, but not every enemy is like this. To add more to the thought process, not all enemies can be manipulated as simply as this. Some require you to get behind them, some require an additional hit before they can be picked up, some throw projectiles at you, some have you dodge attacks before exposing their weak points. It sounds like a small detail, but stop enemies from becoming no threat at all and it forces you to think more. Klonoa is the first game that I've played where enemies are an integral game mechanic rather than a nuisance, and the ways you can use them weave into the level design so well. Some of the most intense moments come in the final few levels where you need to use multiple enemies to get over bottomless pits, which is a great test of your reflexes, and it's helped by the perfect weight and jump Klonoa has. It's always your fault when you mess up, since the game controls so well. This game has this fantastic difficulty curve. Instead of having a fuck ton of gimmicks that are constantly being introduced to you with every level, the game teaches you everything you need to know by the time that you're a third of your way through the game, besides a few enemy types, and the main challenge of the later levels comes from the small amount of mechanics working together in different instances to make for a more chaotic and reaction-based style of play. There are only 12 levels, but each one of them feels like a huge step in your journey since they all have different visual identities and all serve as a giant leap in Klonoa's and Hupao's journey to save their home, the dream world of Phantomile from bad dreams, cast by the evil Guardius. The plot is simple, sure, but across every level, as you explore new environments, you meet new characters and species that tie each area together. The interactions with these characters are entertaining and endearing, especially the encounters with Guardius' henchman Joker, who constantly causes trouble for you at every turn, often being the one who initiates the boss battles. He's an entertaining character, but in terms of being evil, he doesn't compare to Guardius, who is a threat from beginning to end, doing all that he can to cast bad dreams on Phantomile, and his voice is so intimidating, only made scarier by the compression of the voice clips. I like that these colourful characters exist across these different worlds since it builds Phantomile as a real place instead of just being an obstacle course, which I definitely prefer in video games. I want to be immersed in what I'm playing, and Klonoa does that not only with its world building, but it also does it incredibly well with its soundtrack. None of the music is remastered, all the tracks are the same ones from the PS1 game, as compressed as before. It usually feels weird to me when games do this, but the compositions are so good that I couldn't even tell that these were old tracks on my first playthrough, which just shows how hard this soundtrack slaps. I specifically adore the music that plays in the final platforming level, Vision 6-2. It's just an exciting piece to listen to just before you take on Guardius. Speaking of the fight with Guardius, let's talk about the boss fights as a whole. I was pretty surprised to find out that all the boss fights are great, something that's pretty rare for games, especially ones released in the 90s. All of them focus around throwing enemies similar to the actual levels, and they're a bit on the easy side all around, but most of them have good designs and concepts. One of my favourite bosses is Gelbomb, since you need to quickly work out what height you should jump to avoid his attacks, then attack it from above when it comes past. Guardius himself tests your knowledge of your momentum and your jump arc, since you fight him on a rotating spear and you have to avoid attacks raining down from above, then quickly pick up falling enemies and throw them at him. And the true final boss, Nahatom, is a test of your understanding of platforming, the wing ring, and your reactions as a whole, since you need to throw enemies into 5 moon cannons to damage it. It has 3 phases, it's challenging, it's climactic, it's everything that a final boss should be in my eyes. And then, after that great boss fight, we get one of the saddest endings to a video game that I've ever seen. Granted, it's a lot more effective on the PS1, but it still hit me pretty deep while playing this version. Klonoa and Hugh Power return to Phantomile after defeating Nahatom. Oh, by the way, I should probably have thrown this earlier in the script, but Hugh Power looks different because he actually reveals himself to be the Prince of the Moon Kingdom just for the end of the game, which doesn't really do anything, but I just thought to mention. Anyway, Klonoa asks Hugh Power if he's going back to the Moon Kingdom, which leads Hugh Power into revealing that Klonoa isn't actually from Phantomile, and was only summoned here by Hugh Power to stop Guardius from casting bad dreams, and all their memories were just constructs that Hugh Power made to give Klonoa the illusion that he lived here. And this hits Klonoa pretty deep, since they were friends ever since they were children. Klonoa is upset and angry that Hugh Power lied to him, but shortly after, Klonoa is sucked out of Phantomile while screaming that he doesn't want to leave. Hugh Power tries to help pull him back down, but he can't, and Klonoa flies off into another world. It's sad and effective ending to an otherwise happy and light-hearted adventure, even if it's only 2 to 3 hours in length. There's more to do than just beat the story though, as each level has 6 Phantomilians for you to rescue within, usually found after optional platforming challenges or in hidden rooms. None of them are very hard to find, but if you want to get them all you need quick reactions as well as a good understanding of the controls. Pretty much the stuff that you need to beat the main game. And I had 66 at the end when I beat Guardius, so you know, it's not actually that hard to get them all. If you save all 72 Phantomilians though, you unlock one final bonus level, which is definitely the hardest level in the game. It's called Baloo's Tower. It's the ultimate test of your skills, and it stretches the possibilities of what can be done with the wing ring. It would be a lot more satisfying to beat if there weren't so many checkpoints, but it's still a great challenge. It's pretty underwhelming that your reward for just doing this level is a sound test, but whatever. You can also collect 150 dream stones in all the levels for something, I guess, but I'm not doing that. I'm happy that I found love in this game. I wouldn't say it's one of my favourite games ever made or something, but it's a really unique game that I think everyone should try out. I left a lot of this game out of my script since I don't want to spoil all of the story or all of the ingenious level design, but just know that I have a high opinion of it, and it's unlike any other game that I've ever played. I love the mechanics, the level design, the soundtrack, the story, the characters, its visual design. Everything about this game is great. It's an absolute classic and you should pick it up. By the way, I just listened back to everything I said in the script. I noticed that I called it the wind ring. It's actually the wind ring, not the wing ring. Fucking idiot.
I'll just get this out of the way now. Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil is one of the best sequels I've ever seen and one of the best platformers I've ever played. While I really enjoyed the first game, I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't a huge improvement on every front. You want a more heartwarming and entertaining story? We got it. You want a natural evolution of previously established mechanics as well as a ton of new ones? We got it. You want a living, breathing new world to explore with a beautiful soundtrack to accompany your journey? We got that as well. This game follows after its predecessor's narrative. Klonoa falls into a new dream world known as Lunatea, where he meets two new friends, Lolo and Popka, a priestess in training and her sidekick. I won't spoil too much of the story, but the main plot has you and your new friends travelling across different kingdoms, collecting different elements from giant bells such as tranquility, joy, indecision, sorrow and discord. You're also competing with two rivals with the same goal as you, Leorena and Tat, who you have quite a few run-ins with throughout the game, sometimes having full levels dedicated to chasing one of them. I think that Klonoa 2 finds a perfect balance between using old elements and incorporating new ones. You're still using the wind ring, this time powered by your new friends to inflate enemies and use them as an extra jump or projectile, but this time enemy behaviours and functions are a lot more varied. You still have your standard moves, glibs and boomies, but there's quite a lot of newcomers. Jetimo will launch you high into the air at lightning speed when you grab onto him, giving you a couple seconds to position yourself beforehand. He's a fun mechanic who adds a fair bit of spectacle. Kaitun will ascend if you mash B while holding onto him, and the faster you mash, the faster he'll rise. He has a timer though, so you have to make quick work of the section that you're on so you don't fall to your death. When you double jump with Erbil, he'll send you shooting far up, allowing you to destroy boxes or defeat other enemies. Lakuri changes colour when you throw him at enemies, allowing him to destroy gems of the same colour that block off pathways. The fact that you have a free hand for a few seconds when you throw him makes for some of the most interesting and thought-provoking puzzles in the game. The original game had some really good puzzles in the later levels, involving throwing enemies at switches in a time limit to open a door or save another Phantomile, but in this game puzzles appear consistently throughout the game, and the more labyrinthian level design along with the more varied enemy types make for a more engaging and challenging journey than before. Granted, I don't think that all of the levels are hits. I like the fact that the levels are longer and more interesting, but some of them really outstay their welcome. Maze of Memories is a bit of a standout in this aspect. The setting and music here are great. There's a cool gravity flipping mechanic and the game plays with it in a lot of creative ways, really making good use of Erbil in particular, but it's long and puzzle oriented, meaning that your first time through here will probably take a while. To be fair, the puzzles here are some of the best in the game. Some of my favourite ones have to be the ones involving Erbil and the boomies, but you start to get really tired of it all after a while, despite how enjoyable it all is. I'd also say that Ishra's arc suffers from the length issue. You're trying to activate all three engines of the arc by entering each one and powering them from the inside, but there are a few sections where you need to find a key and take it to a door to progress, but the key doors are kind of small and don't stand out too much at all, so you could wander past them like 300 times like I did. This is a pretty consistent problem throughout the whole game actually, but it's minor I suppose. Even with a lot more story and cutscenes, the game never really slows down to a crawl. Most cutscenes are about a minute or two maximum, and there isn't much filler since nothing in the story feels shoehorned in, unlike in the first game where specific story beats simply existed because they wanted more cutscenes. Whereas in Klonoa 2, each story beat makes sense. You're constantly having run-ins with the rival team who have the exact same goal as you, so you usually catch them while they're close to achieving one of the elements. I won't say that all of the cutscenes are particularly entertaining because they aren't, honestly. There's some where the characters stand around expositing for a minute or two about stuff that really doesn't mean much to the story or the game overall, but you can count the number of those on one hand. I prefer Klonoa 2's story to its predecessors since the characters are a lot more interesting and there's a lot more going on, and I won't spoil too much of it here since it's truly better seeing it for yourselves and watching the story unfold. It's quite unpredictable. If I could pinpoint one thing that I think Klonoa 2 completely outshines its older brother on in every single way, it would have to be the theming and atmosphere. Phantomile was, for the most part, a happy, light-hearted world with not too much helping it stand out as a setting. Don't get me wrong, I loved the way that it looked and the characters that lived there, but it didn't have much visual identity until the last few levels. Lunatea is also bubbly and bright in some areas, but the places that you explore feel a lot more real. The Sea of Tears is a great introduction stage mechanically, it shows you a lot of what to expect, but it's particularly striking visually. The dark, cloudy sky matched with the raging waves smashing into the rocks not only contrast Phantomile in every way, but show you that it's not all sunshine and rainbows this time. You'll be exploring darker, more depressing settings sometimes that reflect the bad state that Lunatea is in. Making your way through the village and exploring dangerous caves in Lalakusha feels comforting because of the mesmerising soundtrack and calming atmosphere. You never want to run through the game as quickly as possible since you want to appreciate the world. The Kingdom of Sorrow resembles some of the later levels in the first game visually, but even in a game full of atmospheric locations, it still feels like the black sheep of the bunch. I don't know what it is, but there's something so intense about platforming high in the sky across huge gaps. It makes the endgame feel a lot more climactic. You've come so far to get here and the stakes are high. I also really enjoyed the reuse of levels in this game. That sounds bad on paper, but hear me out. Some levels are played a second time after you visit them for story related reasons, and the layouts and objectives are often heavily altered. For instance, you'll fight Bikash after playing through Volk City for the first time, but when you defeat him you'll return there with the city in flames and a surprise appearance of him as he chases you for around half the level. My favourite reuse though comes from near the end of the game, where you revisit Ishrazak in an attempt to deactivate all the 3 engines that you powered on before. I love this concept already since it makes sense in the story, but the way that you do it all is really fun. You need to throw boomies into the engines to destroy them, and when you throw one in, the timer will start ticking, indicating how much time you have before the engine explodes. This means that you have to rush out the area the instant you throw the boomy in, and it tests your knowledge of the level layout since the timer is pretty tight. This makes one of the more slower paced levels a lot more thrilling, and I think it makes one of the best levels overall in the whole game. The addition of hoverboard segments also gives the game a lot more variety. These levels pop up quite a lot, even in the final boss fight, and they're incredibly fun. The board moves on its own and you can perform all your regular actions, and I think it's challenging since some of the jumps can be quite demanding, especially in the Forgotten Path where all the roads are minimal and thin. I don't think there's a single level in this game that I'd call unfun. Sure, some might say they're welcome, but they all have something to call their own, whether that be a set piece or gimmick. I can remember pretty much every level so clearly in my head because the game does an amazing job at making them all feel distinct, not only in the level design but in the soundtrack as well. I found the soundtrack of Klonoa 2 to be one of the best video game OSTs I've listened to in recent memory. It knows when to be dark and ominous, and it knows when to be upbeat and involved. I've linked the soundtrack for both games in the description, so check them out if you feel like it. I highly recommend both of them. If there's one thing I'd say Klonoa 2 slacks on, however, it would be the boss fights. I found them to be just okay overall. They follow the same format as before, throw enemies into their weak spots to damage them, but they were a bit too easy this time around and nowhere near as well designed or unique as before. If I could pick a standout, it would definitely be Palante since you fight him on the hoverboard at really high speeds, but apart from that, I'd say all the bosses are just okay at best. Even the final boss fight against the King of Sorrow is incredibly easy and ends in just about a minute. It's a bit of an unsatisfactory ending to an otherwise incredible game. Well, I think that's all I can say without spoiling the best bits. I'm glad that I found love in both of these games and saw them both through to the end. They're truly special and I totally recommend them if you're looking for new platformers to play. Hell, I'd suggest them no matter what. Klonoa 2 has quickly risen to become one of my new favourite games and I think I'll be replaying it quite a few times honestly. I'm aware that there are some Klonoa games on GBA that are apparently very good for what they are, so I might have to check them out sometime for the sake of more Klonoa content in my life. My main issue with Daughter Phantomile and Lunatea's Veil is that they're only about 4 hours in length each, which isn't objectively bad, but the Wind Ring has so much potential and feels kind of underdeveloped honestly. The Klonoa Phantasy Reverie Series is a great package of 2 fantastic games and it's worth every penny as far as I'm concerned. I feel like playing Klonoa 2 again to be honest, so thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.